please state your name and where you are?
Oh, my name is Jack Druckmiller, and I'm in my home in Fort Wayne, Indiana.
What's the date?
This is the 25th of March, 1998.
Do I have permission to tape you with a videotape
Yes, you certainly
and an audio tape?
do. Indeed.
Do I have permission to submit this information to Mr. Mudd's AP US History class?
Yes, no problem.
And do I have permission to submit this information to the Marion, Indiana Public Library?
Sure do.
Okay, well, I guess we'll begin then. Okay, before the beginning of World War II, how was the family life? Like, what did you and your friends do?
Well, I came from a one-child family, and family life was, I think, probably closer than it is in these days. Uh, my mother and father both worked. Mother worked part-time. We had a good family life. My parents were always home for me, and I had friends that I associated with and grew up in my neighborhood, and we just found things to do that I guess in those days were normal for people like us.
Okay. How about during the war? What kind of things did your family do then?
Well, my parents, of course, both continued to work during the war. I was gone, and I did not get home too often, but they maintained the home and helped with the war effort wherever they could.
After the war, were things a lot different than before or during?
Not a great deal. Of course, after the war, I came back to my hometown and immediately went back to school. I was in college when I went into the service, and so I had not completed the work for my degree. So I returned to school after the war.
Before the war, what did you do for entertainment? Like, did you go to movies or?
Well, we didn't go to too many movies because I worked at the movie. I spent about 5 years working at, in fact, the movie ushering at the movie theater was one of my first early jobs. And I worked at the Indiana Theater in Marion and the Lyric Theater for 5 years for the then manager, Mr. Billy Connors.
Did you attend church before the war?
Yes, I was. As a matter of fact, I was born in a Quaker family. My grandparents, or my grandmother, was a member of the South Marion Friends Church, which basically was a Quaker church, and I attended church there until I left for the service.
Did like going to church would change before or during the war or after?
Well, in my programs that I was involved with during the war, particularly in midshipman school, we were required to attend church as a group, and of course, this was something almost to look forward to on Sundays because we didn't get a chance to get out of the place for very many other things.
How about after the war? Did you still go to church or?
I did. We have moved several times since then, and I have attended several churches, but still have continued to.
You said that you worked at the theater before the war, right?
Yes.
Did you have any jobs or during the war, before you were shipped out? Or?
No, I was, like I said, I worked at the theater even while I was at Marion High School.
after the war? Did you get a job then, or?
Well, like I said, after World War II, I returned home and went immediately back to school to obtain my degree. And when I got my degree, then I had my first real job, and that was the job that I started at that time that I kept for the next 40 years.
What job was that?
Well, I went to work for, at that time, Indiana General Service, the electric company serving the Marion area, and eventually retired 40 years later with American Electric Power.
Do you know if there were more jobs before, during, or after the war?
I think there were enough jobs after the war, but they were a different kind. Of course, the defense work had fallen off greatly, and many new industries had begun to spring up, and I think the types of jobs that were available were considerably different than those during the war.
Do you know about some of the higher paying jobs? What did people do for?
Well, I think, of course, the people who had the highest paid job were people who had college degrees, many of them professional types, doctors, lawyers, dentists, engineers, and other people who were highly trained for specific work.
During the war, would you say that more women and children worked than before, or even after?
Oh, most certainly. I know during the war, my wife relates to me that her mother worked in an aircraft factory, and her father also worked in an aircraft factory. So there were a lot of women who had not worked before who took defense jobs.
Was that mainly the kind of job that women took?
I think so. I think since many of the industries had lost personnel due to people going into the service, that the women had a tendency to fill in those jobs.
How about children? Did you see them maybe taking more jobs, or?
No, I didn't notice that the children worked any more than before, but perhaps they did some.
You were in World War II, correct?
World War II and Korea.
What area of the military were you in?
Well, while I was in Purdue, I saw the necessity to become involved in some program because the draft was breathing down our back. So most of us in school at that time picked one of the many college training programs that would lead to commission in one or the other of the services. I picked a program called V-12, which was a Navy training program that said after I had acquired so many semesters of college, I would be automatically transferred to the Naval Reserve Midshipman School for training, officer training, and that's the course that I picked and the route that I chose. And so I was transferred from Purdue after 2 more semesters over there to the Naval Reserve Midshipman School at Columbia University.
During the war, you were stationed at Columbia, and
No.
or
When I graduated from Columbia and received, I was commissioned at Henson. I was immediately sent to small craft training stations in Miami, Florida, and Key West, and I became an anti-submarine warfare officer, or trained to become an anti-submarine warfare officer. And from that training, I was sent directly to a brand new destroyer that had just been built and was ready to move out into the Pacific.
do you know what was the name of the destroyer?
That destroyer was the USS Frankie Evans, and strangely enough, the Evans served during 3 wars, World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. And during Vietnam, it unfortunately had a collision with an Australian aircraft carrier, which cut it in half, and the forward half sank with a loss of 86 lives.
When you were on the ship, where was it?
This ship, after it was put in place in commission in Staten Island, New York, was sent on shakedown operations in the Bermuda area. This is done to make sure that things work properly. And if they do work properly, then we were given an assignment. We were sent through the canal and out to the Okinawa campaign, which was the final campaign of World War II.
And you were in that campaign?
Yes.
Um,
Our activity in that campaign was one of doing radar picket duty around the island of Okinawa, where the island was trying to take the island, complete the takeover of the island, and the Navy surrounded it with the radar picket installations, ships to, of course, identify the enemy, which was, of course, trying to hold on to the island.
Do you have any stories, not only about when you were in the war, or?
Well, while we were on radar picket duty in Okinawa, I'll tell you the story. We were on radar picket station number 9, and the radar picket stations consisted of 3 destroyers and 4 little ships called LCS ships. These were small rocket-firing ships. And we were some 50 or 60 miles southwest of Okinawa one night when we picked up what we thought was an enemy plane headed for Okinawa, and we tried to get identification on the target. We could not get any response by radio or from IFF identification at that time, and the plane continued on like it was going to fly right over our heads. So the captain ordered us to open fire on the plane, and the plane was shot down. The next morning at daylight, we discover a second lieutenant of the United States Air Force in a rubber raft, and he had been the pilot of that plane, and he managed to survive and get out of the plane, and we never could understand why he didn't identify himself. Either the equipment didn't work right, or he was so scared that he didn't know how to do it. And I remember distinctly when they brought him on board the ship, the captain said, "What would you like to have to eat?" The first thing he said was ice cream.
Do you have any other stories about things that happened to you, or
Well,
even before the war?
I had a good friend that was in the service at the same time I was in the service, by the name of Bob Milton, who was from Fairmount. And Bob and I had been members of the Naval Reserve Program for a while. Now this is a Korean War story. Bob was sent out on the carrier Rendova, and I went out in the Pacific on another destroyer. And Bob became a radio operator, and I was a communications officer on the destroyer. So we were able to keep in touch with each other through the naval communication system while we were out in the Western Pacific, while he was operating the radio and I was involved with radio.
When you came back from World War II, did you find it difficult to get back into your normal habits?
Yeah, it was quite different because we were used to military ways of doing things, and we had to kind of get back into civilian life again. And it was a little bit of a change to acclimate, but we all managed to do it. Of course, I was only back a matter of 4 years until I was recalled from Korea, so back I went again for another 2 years.
Yeah, what was your hardest thing to get used to again after you got back from?
Probably the fact that we weren't regimented. In other words, we didn't have to everything by the clock like you do usually in the military.
Is there anything else that you'd like to add?
No, except that I, after having a stretch of service in World War II young men think that they have to have a direct political contact in order to get into these service academies. And that isn't true. And many times the service academy openings go unfilled because the young men don't know that. So I enjoyed that phase of my reserve activity in helping counsel with young men in this part of the state, in teaching them how and helping them to get an appointment to the academy.
Well, thank you. Is there anything else that you think would be of interest to the viewing people, or people viewing the video?
Well, they might be interested in the fact that during World War II I served on one destroyer, then during Korea I served on two more. And as strange as it may seem, now some 50 years after service on those ships, these people who served at that time are starting to have reunions. And my wife and I have been to several of these reunions where we've become reacquainted with people that I served with 50 years ago. And it indeed is a real treat and a very enjoyable time to be able to reminisce with those people that you knew then, and listen to their story of what's happened to them since they got out of the service. And it's a lot of fun, and we're glad to continue to attend more of them if we can.
You know when the next one is?
Yes, the next one I have is coming up in September. It'll be in the Washington, D.C. area. Then we have one scheduled for October in the, an area down in Missouri. I can't think of the name of the resort area, but it's south of the famous Branson, where all the entertainers now have gathered.
Before, during, and after the war, you lived in Marion, correct?
Yes, yeah, I was born and raised in Marion, and went back to Marion, of course, and maintained my residence there until, well, as a matter of fact, after I went to work for the electric company, I lived in Marion and continued to live there until 1970. 1970, I was transferred away, and I have not lived there since.
You said that you had shut down a plane that was after they had responded. Were you in any other kind of fights or?
Well, the destroyer type naval vessel is equipped to do several things. It carries 5-inch guns, of course, which can be used for bombardment purposes, or there are also dual purpose that can be used for anti-aircraft fire. So we were exposed in both of those instances. Pardon me. We did both the shore bombardment in the North Korean area, and of course a considerable amount of anti-aircraft work during the Korea and World War II.
Did this boat the submarines were kind of new then, weren't they?
Well, the submarine scare, of course, active submarine work phased out toward the end of the war because the German Axis powers were defeated soundly, and their submarines were, for all practical purposes, defeated. We did have to be concerned about Japanese submarines during the Pacific action in World War II, but there again, once the United States got the upper hand, submarine warfare diminished considerably. kinds of life-sustaining goodies, as well as people who operate military equipment.
Um, was ensign your highest office while in World War II?
No, I managed to make lieutenant commander during my service during Korea, and after I came out of the service and remained active in the Naval Reserve Program representing the Naval Academy, as I had mentioned earlier, I was promoted to commander, so I do hold that was my highest rank, and I retired from the service as a commander.
You said that you graduated from that class in 1940. What kind of stories do you have about that class?
Well, the class of 1940 has been very successful in staying together, and we attribute this to the fact that most of us in the class were born in families that had experienced the Depression. Most of us came from two-parent families at that time, and I think then parents were more interested in their children getting a decent education than they probably are today. Our class has been successful in staying together. Over all these years, we have had our 57th reunion, and we also have to attribute some of the success of this class to the fact that one of our class members has been very studious in putting out a newsletter called The Survey, and that class mate is Bill Fowler, and Bill has just issued the 101st copy of the survey, which is nothing more than a newsletter that things that have happened to various members of the class. We're looking forward to having our 60th reunion here in a couple of years.
When's your next reunion at? Well, I'd like to thank you for your time, and if there's anything else you'd like to say, I know that I really appreciate your help on this project for Mr. Munn's APU Assistant class and for the Marion, Indiana Public Library.
Well, thanks. It's been a lot of